Jayne Cain has worked in the Washington State Wine Commission for over 13 years, and with each year, she becomes more appreciative of the land and the people which work harmoniously together to create amazing wine. This morning, Jayne will be explaining why Washington is such a perfect place to grow and make world-class wines. The title of her speech is Turning Water into Wine. Please give your best jazz hands for Jayne Cain.
Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster. This past weekend, the Wine Commission put on an event, a virtual event, as they all are these days, and it was called State Night, Date Night. What that means is we were encouraging people to go out to their local restaurants, not necessarily chain, but more Washington, Seattle, Washington state-based restaurants, get a takeout dinner, or if they were brave enough, go inside, get some Washington wine, and have a date night, a state night, date night. We really want to promote not only Washington wine, but we want to promote the restaurant industry and the hospitality industry. We have a drink for Washington, eat for stay for and play for campaign going on. We need to remember our neighbors. But our focus is still on Washington wine. And why Washington? Why can this area just bounce out of nowhere, supposedly, and give the rest of the world a run for its money? Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, you've all heard the expression, making wine or water into wine. Now, I'm not talking about the Bible phrase or how the dams on the Columbia brought irrigation to Eastern Washington. The water that I'm talking about happened millions of years ago. Well, not millions, thousands of years ago, I should say. Let me just give you a quick recent history of wine in Washington. The first commercial plantings started in 1960. So you can see how young this region is. The first grape plantings at all for wine grapes was in 1825 down in Fort Vancouver. And when I talk about wine grapes, it is different than the sweet table grapes. I'm talking about the Cabernet Sauvignon, the Chardonnay, those varieties of grapes. Our history of our region actually started about 15 million years ago when fissures opened up in the earth and lava spurted up. And as it cooled, it created these giant basalt layers. And you can see basalt rock all throughout most of Eastern Washington. Now we'll fast forward to about 15,000 years ago. And we were in the middle of an ice age. And the ice sheet came down from California. And as it melted over what is now Montana, it pooled into a giant lake. And this lake was so large, it had the capacity of both Lakes Ontario and Erie combined. It was about 2,000 feet deep. It's called Great Lake Missoula. And at the western edge of that lake, there was an ice dam about 800 feet thick, keeping that water in Montana. Well, the pressure that lake created, pushing against that ice dam, and as the earth heated up, finally it burst and the power of that water bursting through that ice dam up around Lake Pend Oreille, it came gushing through the Spokane area, down through the Columbia Basin at about 80 miles an hour. And this was a wall of water about 400 feet thick. As it came down the Columbia Basin, it just scoured the land with pulverized granite and debris. And it left the ravines and coulees that you can still see today. So this wall of water was trying to find its way to the ocean, and it came just racing down toward the Horse Heaven Hills. For those of you who don't know what the Horse Heaven Hills are, it's a range of hills that rise up from the Columbia River. So basically, the Horse Heaven Hills are bordered by the Yakima Valley to the north and the Columbia River to the south. And it's a huge long range. So the wall of water comes racing and just smacks right into that hill, or the range of hills. There was only one small opening, the Wallula Gap, and that is about 20 miles east of Pasco. But that was the only way for it to get down to the Columbia River. As it smacked into the hills, it backed up over into the Walla Walla area, back up into what is now the Yakima Valley area. And the water backed up to about 800 feet deep. Well, slowly, over the course of a week or so, it made its way finally through the Wallula Gap into the Columbia River and down. When it left, when all that water left, it left silt deposits with the crushed granite and the crushed basalt. Well, you'd think that catastrophe was a huge event. It happened about 25 different times over the course of 2,000 years. Each time just scouring the Columbia Basin, hitting the Horse Heaven Hills, backing up, depositing more silt. You can still see layers of silt at certain places, and that is how the geologists can determine that these floods happened over and over and over. And sometimes there's a layer of ash in between, so they know that there was volcanic eruptions happening at that very same time. Well, in 13,000 years since those floods and the depositing of the debris and the wind-driven silt called loess, all the lands and the dirt and loess have shifted, and winds come out of the southwest and redeposit them around the hills. What this has created is the perfect soil for grapes. Grapevines love to struggle. Their roots will go down tens of feet looking for water. And what that struggle does is it puts its energy into fruit production rather than leaf production. The plant is trying to make sure that it recreates itself. It generates new fruit, new seeds. It wants to be reproductive. If you give it too much water, everything goes to the leaf canopy and the fruit is diminished. So all these wind-driven loess soils let the water, the little bit of water, the 6 inches to 8 inches of water that occurs over there, to go down, drain well. We have very little clay soil, which also helps in preventing pest disease. The biggest pest problem to wine grapes is called phylloxera. And that little bug wiped out almost all of the vineyards in France and throughout most of Europe in the 1860s. But we don't have that problem because of our well-drained soils here. We have the sunlight. We're up much more north than California. So we get about at least an hour more of sunlight every day. The climate over there is warm during the day, cools down at night. It keeps the acidity in the wine. You want that balance of acidity, fruitiness, ripeness. The wind that is over there keeps any molds from forming, whereas here in Western Washington, that's a problem. Eastern Washington, not so much a problem. The aspects from the hills create airflow so that when clouds come in, when fog comes in, they disperse down to the lower points, and the higher points then can remain frost-free. But all of this really started 15 million years ago when the fissures opened up, the basalt layers started, and then 15,000 years ago with Great Lake Missoula. And that is how, in Washington, water has been made into wine. Thank you.